There are thousands of inmates still on a hunger strike that started Monday. They're protesting conditions and indefinite detention in solitary housing units. In a separate fight, Governor Jerry Brown is defying a court order to release nearly 10,000 prisoners to reduce overcrowding. Michael, let's start with the governor's efforts to get a stay on the court order to relieve overcrowding. What's the likelihood of that succeeding?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, this has been an ongoing battle now for years, since 2009, when a three-judge panel ordered the state to reduce its population so it could deliver health, medical care to inmates at constitutional standards, meeting constitutional standards. There's been back and forth in the courts over this. It got to a point where the three-judge panel has now told the state that they have to bring the population down by another 9,000 inmates, or face contempt charges, possible contempt charges. The governor has now filed a motion to the Supreme Court to get a stay, to get a delay on that. We don't know where it's going to head. I mean, we're kind of into new territory here. Advocates and others on the other side say the state could reduce that population, not by a mass release, but by giving good time credits retroactively to inmates who've earned them through good behavior. So we're at another chapter here. The Supreme Court 2 years ago rejected, basically affirmed the lower court's position and threw it back down. But politically, the governor fighting a fight to protect public safety may not be such a bad position to take. It may not be effective with the courts, but he is facing opposition from the Republicans on the public safety front over his realignment efforts. So the politics of this may not be bad for him, but legally, it's right now hard to imagine the Supreme Court's going to reverse a position they took 2 years ago.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious, you know, in all of this, does anybody talk about building more prisons? I mean, if the choice is between letting, is it violent criminals out? And I can't believe the Republicans are arguing for that. That's not their usual position, but why not?
Well, no, the politics are that the Republicans are challenging Brown on realignment, and realignment, which has been diverting inmates to county jails, has already pushed the counties hard. Right. So it may be that the governor has assessed that he doesn't want to push the counties any harder. Right. Thus, he's fighting this battle. Building new prisons, this was an idea. There was money for it. Financial crisis, budget cuts. They are trying to expand capacity. There's still 9,000 inmates out of state. They're going to stay out of state. There might be some building, but not enough to solve this issue.
Let me ask you this. Does the governor have, now he's not extra constitutional, but he has some extraordinary powers in times of real emergencies. Is he anywhere close to being able to use any of those extraordinary powers he has to keep these people locked up, or is it just politics?
That's a good question. You know, the courts have now overruled. They have said the state can to take these measures without needing approval from lawmakers. So it's the courts that are assuming in a way these extra powers. I don't know whether the governor could have those powers, but he just declared that the prison crisis is over and he's lifting the state of emergency in the prison. So I think his powers are actually weaker on that front than they were.
Speaking of prison crisis, there is another one, a separate one going on in the prison system as well, and that's the inmate hunger strike as a protest against what the inmates are calling inhumane conditions surrounding security housing units, also known as SHUs. You've been investigating these facilities for a year in collaboration with the Center for Investigative Reporting. What did you find?
Well, we had at the beginning of the week 30,000 inmates refusing meals. The numbers are down to about 7,000. That's still a lot of men protesting. And the protest is focused at Pelican Bay. This is this prison up in Crescent City, sometimes called a supermax. Pretty stark conditions. Opponents have filed a lawsuit saying that it is a violation of the 8th Amendment. The state says that the prison is humane. I think what distinguishes Pelican Bay is not the design. We have supermaxes around the country. It's the length of time that some inmates have been spending in these units with very harsh restrictions. You know, I've been meeting men who were at Pelican Bay in solitary conditions 20 years, 22 years.
What is the rationale?
The rationale, the department says very clearly that men earn their way there by essentially being players in big, dangerous prison gangs. And there's no doubt that some of the men at Pelican Bay, some of the men involved in this hunger strike, are notorious gang leaders and have faced very serious allegations. But what we found in our investigation is lots of men who were low-level players or who weren't even in the gang got swept up and put in these units. And I think that's really fueling the anger and fueling the protests.
So prison officials cast a wide net.
That's the feeling, and I've talked to corrections officials privately and former correction officials, and I think they now recognize that. Now, what the department says is they're changing the policy and allowing some men to earn their way out through good behavior, or they're just transferring men who now they determine pose a low security risk. So the department's saying it's making changes. The protesters and the advocacy groups are saying it's too little, too late.
It's very ironic when you think about it that as angry as they are, they're picking, in effect, suicide to protest. It's a bizarre thing that if they cannot be rehabilitated or if they can't have their way, then they'll just kill themselves.
Well, and we saw 2 years ago there was a hunger strike. It went about 3.5 weeks, and the men called it off based on some conversations they had with the department. I suspect this situation, they're ready to take it further. The one wild card is there's a federal lawsuit pending. There are settlement talks underway with the Department of Corrections. If they were able to settle the federal lawsuit, which includes some of the inmates as plaintiffs, that might get the inmates to call off the strike, but that's a long shot at this point.
Okay, well, I know you'll be on top of that, as you always are. Thank you, Michael.